Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is quietly trying to create an anti-Ukrainian coalition inside the European Union. So what exactly is this alliance? Who's in? Who's out? And can it even succeed? And what role does the recent election of Andrej Babiš in Czechia play in all this? Let's take a look. I'm Jan and this is Prague Pulse. See, Orbán isn't just looking for friends. He's actually trying to resurrect an old project, the so-called Visegrád Group. Formed in 1991 by Hungary, Poland and then Czechoslovakia, the V3 at the time aimed to unite the countries of post-communist Central Europe on their path to NATO and EU membership. And as you all know, that mission was largely achieved by 2004, with all the four countries now being firmly in both the EU and NATO. But nonetheless, the group, the V4, remained in existence, even though the original goal had already been achieved. See, the general idea was that due to their purported shared history, the four countries would continue to have more or less similar goals even within the institutions that they were now part of, and that they could then help each other and maybe even join forces against larger and more powerful countries, be it France or Germany. That was the logic. But once inside the EU, of course, as you would expect, that unity faded, if it ever existed in the first place, of course. Hungary under Orbán, as you know if you watch Prague Pulse, has largely turned against Brussels and has been in a constant state of struggle with Brussels. Poland, Czechia and Slovakia swinging between pro and anti-EU governments all the time depending on who was in power. But still, I guess out of nostalgia or whatever, the V4 was officially live and well and still kicking strong. But then Russia invaded Ukraine and the illusion of solidarity, not only but mainly within the V4, collapsed entirely. Poland and Czechia became Kyiv's strongest allies, defending and helping Ukraine from day one, while Fico, who got back to power in Slovakia, has been wavering, and Orbán, of course, has openly sided with Moscow. And as the media later uncovered, meetings of the V4 countries, which was still officially in place, descended into shouting matches, open hostility, and some leaders, like Donald Tusk of Poland, have openly doubted in public whether or not it's even worth it to keep the V4 alive, even if it's only on paper. And now Orbán wants to revive the V4, but this time not as a pro-Western alliance aiming to achieve some sort of a large, overarching, objectively positive goal. No, this time, according to sources close to him, it should be an anti-Ukrainian coalition, and this time he may even be finding new partners to join him. You could hardly find anyone better to lead an anti-Ukrainian coalition in Europe than Viktor Orbán. He has built his entire political career on sowing hatred and inciting controversy, of course, including lies about Ukraine. For example, he has repeatedly called Ukraine the cause of the war, an artificial state that has lost all its sovereignty and is being controlled by others, which of course, when you think about it, is basically just echoing the favorite Russian line that the war is just a proxy war between NATO and Ukraine itself, which is a move designed to take all the agency away from Ukraine and portray this as an evil, nonsensical fight between the West and the East. You could well ignore all this if it was just rhetoric, but unfortunately for all of us, this isn't just rhetoric. Orbán has taken concrete steps to actively harm Ukraine. For example, he has repeatedly vetoed or delayed essential EU aid going to Ukraine, and that included him blocking financial packages and sanctions aimed at Moscow. And of course, Orbán is actively blocking Ukraine's EU membership application as we speak. Of course, in doing so, Orbán is claiming that he's only representing the European majority who are, according to him, simply tired of the war. But I mean, yeah, who doesn't want peace? First and foremost, it is Ukraine who desperately want peace. But Putin, as he himself said multiple times, does not want to stop fighting. Orbán's argument that he just wants peace and that's why he's denying all essential aid to Ukraine is basically like people claiming that they just want to stay healthy and that's why we're gonna cancel all hospitals. Oh, of course it doesn't work like that, does it? And now Orbán is actively looking for friends who would share his anti-Ukraine view. And so ultimately, his aim is to increase his own influence in Brussels by building coalitions of like-minded countries. And that's how he came back to the idea of resurrecting the V4. But, as we're going to see, reforming it may be actually more difficult than he believes. Let's begin with Poland. See, Poland used to be Orbán's big ally in defying all sorts of things coming from Brussels. And that was at the time when the PIS was in power. We've also done videos on Poland, so do check them out. But, as you already know, the friendship between Warsaw and Budapest ended the moment that Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. See, unlike Hungary, Poland still remembers its experience with Russia. It remembers that it used to be occupied by Russian forces for a long time, and it doesn't pretend that it hasn't actively fought against Russia and that it hasn't seen the horrors that Moscow has brought. So Poland feels existentially threatened by Russia, which also means that it has been decisively pro-Ukraine. And it doesn't matter what party is currently in government. All major political parties in Poland support Ukraine and actively oppose Russia. And that even includes the PIS, now in opposition and otherwise decidedly conservative, and Polish new president Karol Nawrocki. And that all means that should the V4 ever be reformed as an anti-Ukraine alliance, Orbán simply cannot count on Poland, even if the government changes one day, which it will, and probably even if the PIS returns to power, simply being anti-Ukraine is not going to cut it for Poland. Now let's turn to Slovakia. Yes, Orbán may have much better luck with Slovakia and Robert Fico. Of course, as you know, if you watch Prague Pause, after winning the 2023 election, Slovak PM Fico wasted no time turning Slovakia's foreign policy upside down and basically, much like Hungary, turning the country authoritarian. Within days of taking office, Fico has halted all military aid to Ukraine, called the country totally corrupt and artificial, again repeating Kremlin propaganda, and for good measure, he's called the EU's sanctions against Russia madness. But still, even though all this happened and Fico is decidedly more pro-Russian than anyone would like, he isn't quite as predictable as Orbán. See, Fico is a populist first and only then an ideologue. And that all means that his rhetoric is, of course, loud for the domestic audiences because it needs to be, because Fico needs to cement his power. But at the EU level, he has been much more constructive than Orbán himself, which, yeah, I'll give you, it isn't a lot, but still. For example, Fico mostly doesn't veto aid packages to Ukraine at the EU level, and Slovak companies still send a lot of ammunition to Ukraine with the government's consent, even though, of course, Fico claims that all military aid to Ukraine has stopped. Privately, Slovakia has actually been one of the biggest sources of ammunition to Ukraine. But yeah, even if you consider all of this, it is true that Orbán and Fico can and probably will form a clear, united front of leaders who at least say that Europe should stop arming Kyiv and instead talk peace with Moscow on Russia's terms, of course. And that's how we get back to Czechia. See, after his 2025 win, which we've discussed recently on the channel, do check it out, Andrej Babiš is set to return as Czechia's prime minister. Of course, that's basically given at this point. But unlike Orbán or Fico, he is not driven by ideology at all. He is purely driven by leading a catch-all party, gaining as many votes as possible, and gaining and holding on to power. And that's what drives his entire political career, and that included the 2025 campaign, of course. In the campaign, he tapped into war fatigue because, yeah, a lot of people in Czechia say that they are tired of the war, no matter if it makes sense or not, and promised those people to stop funding Ukraine's defense, much like Fico has done. But Babiš even pledged to get rid of the so-called Czech Ammunition Initiative, even though it actually makes money for Czechia because it's basically just a device to coordinate ammunition going to Ukraine through Czechia, and when it does go through, Czechia then collects all the tax money in the process. But doesn't matter. The claims that Babiš would get rid of it worked. He got almost 35%, which is one of the biggest wins in Czechia's history. Additionally, what doesn't help is also the fact that Babiš will most likely form a government with a far-right extremist party, the SPD, led by Tomio Okamura, he himself having a migration background, but the party being staunchly against migration. And of course, the party has also been very anti-Ukraine and has repeated all sorts of Russian propaganda. Now, to make it all worse, Okamura has now become the speaker of the lower chamber of the Czech parliament in exchange of his party supporting Babiš's future government. And as his first ever official act as speaker, Okamura has had the flag of Ukraine taken off the parliament building. Yes, of course, it's just a small gesture, but it is a gesture. It is a signal. The speaker is actually one of the highest political positions in the country. And that signal is that Czechia is now becoming less pro-Ukrainian. To counterweight, I'll try my best and give you a bit of optimism. See, once in office, I strongly believe that Babiš will try to moderate his tone and try to be more normal, so to speak. After all, Babiš is also one of the wealthiest people in Czechia, and all of his business interests are completely in the West, so he will be definitely keen to keep the door to the EU and NATO open because that's where his wealth and where his business interests lie. It's also why he's firmly ruled out any sort of talk about Czechia leaving either the EU or NATO. That's a non-negotiable for him, and that's a good thing. But as we've also seen, he's now surrounded by open extremists and voters who will again want to see Babiš deliver on his more aggressive anti-Ukraine remarks from the election campaign. Those people voted for him because he was more anti-Ukrainian, and they will want to see him deliver on what he said in the campaign. So we'll have to wait and see how far Babiš is now willing to go in the process of delivering on those promises. In any case, Czechia may soon become yet another voice of skepticism in the EU and maybe even help Orbán resurrect some sort of a new V4 that will be more anti-Ukrainian than it used to be. Now, why does this all matter? The stakes couldn't actually be higher. The EU's foreign policy decisions, that includes sanctions against Russia, of course, or military aid to Ukraine, require unanimity. And that, of course, means that a single country can effectively block the entire EU. And the more countries you have, the more the blocking majority is effective, unfortunately for all of us. And Orbán knows this perfectly well. He doesn't even need Poland. Of course, it would be nice to resurrect the V4 in its original form, but even the axis Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia can wreak havoc in the EU. The alliance could paralyze Brussels on key votes and basically shatter the fragile unity that exists on shunning Russia for its illegal aggression and helping Ukraine. And to make it all worse, this isn't happening in a vacuum. See, public opinion in Central Europe is shifting, and unfortunately for all of us, it is shifting against Ukraine. According to a 2024 survey, 68% of Poles still want Ukraine to win, but it is only 44% of Czechs and just appalling 32% of Slovaks who say the same. For millions of voters now, war fatigue is turning into skepticism, and Orbán and Fico are simply giving that fatigue a political home and using that fatigue for their purposes. The irony, of course, is that those very same countries all have their bloody experience with Russian occupation, but they've chosen to pretend that it never happened. They know what it is to live under oppression and occupation, and what it truly means to be a country with no sovereignty, because the Soviets have decided that you are not entitled to any sovereignty. They know all this. See, once, not so far back, the countries in the heart of Europe looked toward the EU precisely for protection against Russia. And now the very same countries are spreading lies against those who want to do the same right now. And that is the sad reality that we live in. This is Prague Pulse, and we will definitely be following the developments in the region. So if you don't want to miss any of what we have to cover, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.